Welcome, everybody. I want to start off with giving accessibility information so that everyone can participate in our actionable solidarity with Palestine lunch and learn. If you go to the bottom of your Zoom screen, there are three little dots. If you expand the bar at the bottom, you can select that and be able to hit captions so that you can see the captions. We also have ASL interpreters that will be spotlit the entire time, so you have that information as well. We're going to give a land acknowledgement. We always do that at the beginning of our meetings. I would like to acknowledge that I live, work, and play on the traditional territories of the Caddo, Yatasi, Guapa, OCH tribes, and that I occupy this land. This acknowledgement does not take the place of authentic relationships with Indigenous communities, but serves as a first step in honoring the land we are on. I also want to give an emotional labor acknowledgement. Emotional labor is the need for one group to regulate their emotions to satisfy another group, usually the group holding the most power. We want to acknowledge the diversity present and not present in this cohort. This group tends to be comprised of predominantly white folks, and white folks inherently hold more power in our current social system. We also want to recognize that the folks of color in this cohort are inherently carrying the abundance of emotional labor, both in this room and on a daily basis as they navigate the world, many of them navigating multiple systems of oppression. We thank and honor those that do the emotional labor and agree not to exploit it. We acknowledge the need to hold this emotional labor as a group, and it is a goal of this cohort for the folks that do not tend to hold the weight of emotional labor to accept the complexity and pervasiveness of emotional labor. I'd like to introduce our panelists for today. Sandra Tamari. Sandra Tamari is a Palestinian organizer and the executive director of the Adalah Justice Project. She's the co-founder of the St. Louis Palestine Solidarity Committee and was co-chair of the steering committee for the U.S. campaign for Palestinian rights from 2015 to 2018. Based in St. Louis, the murder of Mark Brown in Ferguson in August 2014 greatly impacted Sandra's work. And since then, she has focused on building joint liberation efforts between Palestinians and Black communities. She was the lead organizer of the Palestinian contingent to Ferguson in October of 2014. Zahra Billoo serves as the executive director of the Council on American Islamic Relations, San Francisco Bay Area, an organization dedicated to the empowerment of American Muslims through legal services, legislative advocacy, and community organizing. Zahra earned her undergraduate degrees from the California State University, Long Beach, and her Juris Doctorate from the University of California, Hastings. She is licensed to practice law in California. Outside of her work with CAIR, Zahra bakes birthday cakes for foster children through Cake for Kids, and is a coordinator for Project Feed, a monthly homeless feeding effort in downtown San Francisco. She lives in Milpitas with her two cats, Justice and Peace. Meital Yaniv, born in 1984 in Tel Aviv, Israel, is learning how to be in a human form. They do things with words, with moving and still images, with threads, with bodies in front of bodies, with the earth. They are a death laborer, tending to our prayer for the liberation of the land of Palestine and the lands of our bodies. They keep fires and submerge themselves in ocean and seawater often. Yaniv is learning to listen to the waters, bird songs, caretakers, and ancestors as they walk as a guest on the home and gathering place of the Kawiya, Tongva Kits Nation, the Lucino, Poyakamicham, and Serrano Uaviatam people. Yaniv is the author of Bloodlines. They make offerings through True Name Collective. So as we launch into our panel discussion, we'll bring our panelists in. My first question is, I recently saw a post from Adrienne Marie Brown about this phenomenon called psychic numbing, which occurs in times of staggering catastrophe. It refers to an indifference and helplessness that sets in after devastation and the defeated impression that we cannot help the situation. This matters because a lot of our systems depend on people burning out and withdrawing, because our own bodies are trying to protect us from something we shouldn't have to protect it against. What are some of the ways you counter psychic numbing? How do you build power through small actions when you feel powerless?
Really, ground myself, think about the absolute devastation that the Palestinian people are experiencing right now. I don't know that I know how to get through the psychic numbing. I've been really busy for the last 4 months, and it's been almost difficult to even find a chance to breathe. I really have had to remind myself that joy is absolutely necessary, that we have to rest, that I do better work when I'm rested. That has been, a lot of community coming, to tell me that I really do need to, slow down, process the trauma that we're all witnessing. I've been thinking a lot about how my family was impacted by the events of 1948 and how we are, it's 75 years, 76 years later. These are things that impacted my grandparents and my father, who was, very young at the time. But the reverberations of what happened in 1948 play out to this day. And I think I've just started to sort through them by asking questions of my father, my uncle, and, about what happened and what they understood, all of the tragedies that happened. My dad lost his father, my grandfather, soon after 1948. Not as a refugee. We live in the West Bank, and he was just very depressed. His heart broke after watching, his country be taken in this way, be stolen. And, I think there was a mental break. We're not exactly sure. He left the country. He died outside of Palestine, and he left, my grandmother and 5 young children to, sort through this devastation. And it wasn't until my grandmother was dying, she had dementia in her 90s. When she looked at my daughter, she was asking her questions about why Emma, she said to my daughter, why is your father's family not feeding you? And that, it just brought up all kinds of questions to me. Why would she think that my husband's family wasn't feeding her great-granddaughter? And it was just all of these things, about the fears that she faced as a young mother, trying to, cope in this patriarchal society where she had lost the patriarch and she was alone. Anyway, just to say that, I'm just now beginning to cope with all of that and what that means for how our family has been impacted by this, by events that happened 75 years ago. So it's really hard for me to imagine people that are watching everyone they love be massacred, fathers picking up their children in plastic bags. I don't know in the world how you don't numb yourself to that, because it's too painful. So I'm trying to breathe and I'm trying to witness as much as I can. And I'm really just grateful for community, and I'm grateful for action. We have to just keep doing everything we can. And then in the aftermath of all of this, we fight for the ceasefire. Are we going to be ready to pick up the pieces of all these people that have been broken?
Thank you so much, Alina, and everyone on your team for bringing us together today. It's good to see you all. The last time I saw Sandra was in person, and we were getting arrested in DC, and so her opening comment about being busy is the first thing that comes to mind. Is in some ways it's not so much. It's the violence that we're witnessing, but also the busyness that it is requiring of so many of us is what is numbing. for many of my friends in this work, we'll talk about how we find ourselves crying unexpectedly. When we think we're not supposed to cry, we cry. And when we're supposed to cry, we can't find the tears, because we're just so overwhelmed with wanting and needing and trying to do everything we absolutely can. And then feeling helpless when it gets worse rather than better. And so adding to your question about numbing is, it's not just witnessing the catastrophe, it's trying to stop it. That is itself just is something that is difficult to describe, but numbing is what comes to mind. Is sometimes I'll see a horrible picture or a video, and sometimes I'll cry on the first instance, and sometimes it'll take me seeing it half a dozen times. Or someone else will talk to me about it, and I'll realize, oh yeah, I saw that in the stream of many other things I was consuming between meeting invites and events and rallies, and someone needs to talk to a reporter. And so there are multiple factors in the numbing. I would offer that there's a few things that are keeping me going. The first is faith. I believe that God is just, and that ultimate justice may not be seen in this world, but will definitely be seen in the hereafter. And so I have to carry that at all times, to know that it is not ultimately in my control. What I control is what I do, but that the Israeli occupation forces, the Zionist cheerleaders, the politicians will face justice. And it's not just that they will face justice, it's that the Palestinians will face mercy, or will receive mercy. We believe in the Muslim faith that martyrs feel no pain, that when they are leaving this world, that at the first instance of pain, that is replaced with joy and visions of the heavens that they will go to, and that children who are martyred will be reunited with their parents in heaven. And so my faith is in part what is keeping me going, and then the faith of the Palestinians. I had the opportunity to visit the Palestinian Red Crescent Society in Cairo in December, and I met a woman who they told me don't ask about her family, and I was dumb American, showed up, and I was like, why not ask about her family? And somebody pulled me aside and said she lost her husband and 3 children. And when I couldn't control my emotions, she pulled me in for a hug, and she kept saying Alhamdulillah, or thank God. And I thought, like, this woman's faith is what I need. And so faith is primarily what is keeping me going. I would say also that surrounding myself with people who care about these issues, right? Like, they may not cry when I cry, they cry at different times, we're all messed up, but we'll meet each other on the streets as we're shutting something down, or in an email drafting session, or we're pulling together a petition and counting phone calls. So really choosing community, choosing family, is so key for me right now, because I find myself at times in settings where I'm like, how are we not talking about this, or how are we not bothered by this? But the people who are in it seem to all be practicing that balance of, sometimes we just need to talk about something else, and sometimes we need to just think about something else, but we're aligned. And so when somebody needs to talk about it, or somebody is struggling, we're there to support each other. And then the last one I would say is the wins. They feel few and far between, but I've taken the position that one of my jobs as an organizer is to find those and lift them up, because that shows us, right, the incremental progress that we're making, to be able to say that the majority of Americans, Muslim and Jewish, are calling for a ceasefire now, that there are half a dozen, if not more, protests every day across the country. I'm in Asia right now, but woke up to join this panel, and woke up to news that my comrades in San Francisco shut down the Golden Gate Bridge. And that's just every day. And when it's not, a massive protest that does something unprecedented, it's a city council that passes a ceasefire resolution and ignites a movement for ceasefire resolutions across the country. And it's organizers that say, oh, you don't want to pass a ceasefire resolution? Okay, we're going to go one further and be like the city of Hayward and pass a divestment bill and move money from the companies that are complicit in this. And so it's not one single strategy, it's many. But for me, what's working is faith, chosen family and community, and then looking for and lifting up the winds.
Thank you, Alina. Thank you so much, and to the team, and Zahra and Sandra. It's an honor to be here with you. Thank you for your work. Yeah, I want to amplify everything that was already said, and what I can add to that is I think I come back to the land when I need to be reminded. Last night in the city where I live, we tried to pass a ceasefire resolution in the city council, and after 5 hours of public comments, the 3 council members that we were trying basically to flip just read the statement that they wrote earlier that day, as if they haven't heard any one of the statements spoken for 5 hours. This was close to midnight, and it was devastating. And the motion didn't pass. And then this morning I woke up, and a friend in the West Bank, their house has been demolished in Siloam, and I got a message from another friend with a video that as soon as the army left, people on the ground are already rebuilding the home. So when I see that, as depressed as I woke up this morning, when I see that that's a mood, that connection, I find a way to get myself to the land where I live and just bow down in prayer and ask for help. And plants help me. I gathered some medicinal plants before coming here today because I knew I needed a little bit of a lift. And I think also just learning how grief can break us ever more open. And I work as a death doula, so really coming into new practices of grief and what does it mean to communally grieve and allow that to transform us to what does it mean to, us here witnessing this, and also need to like do our mundane things because nothing ceases here. So we're being stretched in this way. And then I just, I feel like there's ways in which we come together to grieve. And in those moments, whether it moves us into action or into breakage or into rest because we were able to cry finally, or whatever it is that our body needed to do, then we find another step to take. And the last thing I would say is really, listening to what Sandra is saying about being with those family stories from 75 years ago and finding those shapeshifters in the bodies right now. And I keep thinking about the children who are still alive in Gaza, and what does it mean to hear bombs explode for so many days, and what's happening in their nervous systems. And coming back to Adrienne Marie Brown and that way that they so beautifully speak about the interconnectedness and the fractal, and just trying to hold those nervous systems whenever I can, to just be like, if I'm breathing here, can that breath move there? And what are the tree roots that can support that? And what are the communities that can hold that with me? And yeah, and I think there are ways in which we must learn, specifically as people with Israeli, Jewish, white identities in this country, to care deeper, and not numb out, and find a way when you do need to numb out, to find the people that can help you feel what's coming up, so that you can care deeper. And in that caring deeper, we get to go into the undercurrent where all those trauma roots live. And then we do that work so that when Palestine is free, we come to it healed. And allow those prayers to transform them. I've been tending to a prayer to bring the Israeli identity and stay to a loving and caring death. And I allow that prayer to break me every day so that I can understand what it means to tend to that prayer. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much to each of you for your vulnerability and sharing all of that and all of the different perspectives. And I think sometimes it is difficult I think it's a natural human reaction to when we are uncomfortable to find ways to stop, to find ways to not be uncomfortable. And what you're speaking to, meital, I think is what you've all spoken to is the humanness in that of like, sometimes we do need to shift and do something different so that we can rest, Sandra, like you were talking about, to be able to show up and to continue the work that is important. Because if we've stretched ourselves to brokenness, a different kind of brokenness than maybe what you're talking about, meital, but to where we can't show up, then that prevents us from doing the work that I think is connected back to the earth and to our hands and to our culture and to our history, to our lineage, our ancestors, where we are right now. I'm really curious, Sandra, I'm wondering if you can speak. I think within Seattle Arts and Culture for Anti-Racism, I love when we do cross-sector work or we are doing intersectional justice work. I think about the legacy of the Southern strategy in like the 60s and 70s with Reagan and Nixon, and this perpetuating narrative that, man, if we can get poor white people to come over here and make Black people the problem, then we can maintain our power. It's not actually going to trickle down to poor white people, but it'll benefit us at the top, rather than us figuring out maybe you're poor and I'm poor. We're poor for different reasons, but how do we build collective power against the systems of oppression that are harming both of our communities? And I know that, you were based in St. Louis, in Ferguson when Michael Brown was murdered. And I know that you talk about how that deeply impacted your liberation work. And I'm curious if you'd be willing to share what you've learned from that cross solidarity network of Black and Palestinian communities, and maybe even how those communities are working together to build power in the movement for a ceasefire now.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, for sure. We, 2014 was a summer of deep grief. We were also mourning for Gaza. There was a terrible assault happening on Gaza that resulted in the deaths of 2,200 people. We forget how many times Gaza has been attacked in this way. And it was also a terrible summer in Jerusalem. Mohammed Khadr was a young Palestinian, 12 years old, who was kidnapped from the stoop of his home by Israeli settlers and was burned to death. And I just, it was that summer, late July, when all of this was happening. So I was in a deep state of mourning, just thinking about all these lost lives and these children. And I woke up on the morning of August 9th, 20 minutes away from Ferguson, where I live, and saw the reports of a young Black man bleeding out on the street, police tape all around, and his mother desperately trying to reach him. He laid on the ground for 4.5 hours and bled out. Michael Brown became a spark for an uprising here in Ferguson and across the country. And that was 10 years ago. And I'm just really, that moment for the Palestine movement was so pivotal because we were able to, begin connecting our grief. I mean, it really just started out as like going to Ferguson as a grieving people. We went there the first Saturday after Michael Brown's murder, a few of us, with a simple banner that read, "Palestine loves Ferguson." And I've never experienced a kind of like love and recognition in my entire life. There were people walking up to us to hug us, to thank us for being present. The things they were saying were like, we didn't think anyone in the world was paying attention. We didn't think anyone cared. And so just the idea that you showed up for people was so, so powerful. And it was just a lesson about, why radical solidarity is so threatening, right? As you said, to the powers, right? We know that the powers of our oppressors are coordinated and that they're unified. And when we join forces, we cause them to tremble. And that's our job, right? Our job is to make these empires tremble. Absolutely. And so, the relationships and the trust and the deep, deep knowledge that was built over the last decade, has resulted in these very organic shows of love and solidarity from the Black community in this country. Like, we didn't have to go into Black communities and say, this is why history didn't start on October 7th. This is why we must stop. We must call not only for a ceasefire, but we must end this terrible siege of Gaza. We must call for an end to the occupation of Palestine and, fight for a right of return. I mean, there was no education that needed to happen because all of those relationships had been built. And so, because we're here in St. Louis, we get calls from the New York Times and from different press agencies that are like, can you help us understand where all of this solidarity is coming from? And you're like, well, you just haven't been paying attention. You haven't been on the streets. You've been looking only at the power structures and not at what's happening below. And so, I'm very proud of the work that we've built. I'm so grateful for groups like the Movement for Black Lives, who were calling it genocide before even Palestinians were. Their vision for Black lives called it genocide. They've taken all the hits, but they have not fallen down once. They've not hesitated once. And so we're continuing to, uplift that the fight for abolition in this country and the fight to end police brutality in this country is Palestine work. Like, we see it as the same fight. And that, when Black people are free in this country, Palestinians will have no trouble. I believe that firmly in my bones.
Sandra, thank you for speaking so much to that intersectionality of liberation work and the tying back to like being rooted in relationship with people and us all having to do our own examinations, whether we are white or we're folks of the global majority, folks of color. We all have our own biases or experiences that cloud us, and we all require kind of meital, again, what you were talking about, of like, we have a lot of unlearning to do and work to do to be in true solidarity with communities. Zahra, I think, kind of speaking on what Sandra just shared, I think you demonstrated that intersectionality of liberation work as CAIR organized that demonstration in San Jose recently during the VP's Reproductive Freedoms Tour, calling out the irony of caring about women's health and wellness when Palestinian women are facing miscarriages. They don't have access to feminine hygiene products, cannot access anesthesia, are starving. Can you speak to how the diversity of the Muslim community is building collective power with others in advocating for an end to this genocide?
So I remember in October, there's a conversation at my house about how are Palestinian women like navigating their periods? Like, what do you do in a war zone? And I don't know why, like it had occurred to me prior with respect to like unhoused women in the United States. Like how, when you're living in a tent or on a street and everything you have is in a shopping cart, do you have money for pads? Like pads are expensive. And do you get to be picky about which kinds and which brands? But it hadn't occurred to me about war zones before. And so I learned that Palestinian women were taking pills to suppress their periods. But that was in October when medical supplies were, I don't want to say in abundance, but at least somewhat accessible. And it was maybe a matter of convenience, not you hadn't run out of pads just yet. But November, December, January, and now there are stories about the women in Palestine using the sides of like tent scraps for as pads. And there is no water to shower with. So what do you do when you have an accident or it's a bad day? And some people get it so bad that they can't walk when they're on their period. And so how do you relocate from the north to the south or from the south within the south? Or how do you escape Rafah if you don't have these products? So when I was in Egypt, they were packing, Beit al-Mal was packing separate boxes. So there were food boxes, and then there were what they call dignity kits. And so they included pads, soap, shampoo, razors, bras and underwear, things that, like, again, I get to be selective about in the United States, which brand, what size, what type. And this was like a one size fits all situation. And they sent, I think, maybe 2,700 boxes. But if we assume that half the population of Gaza is women, which I imagine it is, then what's 2,700 in the context of 1 million plus women that have been displaced? So fast forward, and we're grappling with President Biden and Vice President Harris on various tours, some through the White House and some on the campaign front, all rallying up votes and support on issues that they pride themselves on, right? And women's reproductive freedom is one of those issues. The messaging is that if Donald Trump wins, if the Republicans gain control, and I'm saying this really honestly in a C3 context because I'm an equal opportunity hater with all of them right now. But if the other side wins, then women will lose what we have gained, or where, in the context of California, where we are leading as it relates to our bodies and our choices. And so a number of us have committed that wherever this administration goes, that we will show them how unwelcome they are, that we will throw them a quote unquote party at every location we can find. And here they came to San Jose thinking they wouldn't face opposition. They published their location a week in advance. And so we gathered to protest them. And Alina, I appreciate the credit to CAIR, but it was really a coalition effort. All I did was like gather a bunch of friends from different organizations and say, hey, let's get on a Zoom together. And then it took on a life of its own. The action was endorsed by over 24 organizations: Black, Indigenous, Socialist, Jewish, Muslim. And the real opportunity here was the healthcare workers, the birth workers, the abortion doulas, people who we don't ordinarily see as organizing for Palestine, but who are now calling out the interconnectedness of it. Because how could the vice president tour the country talking about reproductive freedom when, to your point, Palestinian women are facing miscarriages at a rate that has increased by over 300%. They are having C-sections without anesthesia. And should them and their babies survive that, they then face the risk of starvation. This on the backdrop of also no feminine hygiene products, no medical care, no prenatal vitamins, none of those things. And so I cannot celebrate my so-called reproductive freedom when my Palestinian sisters do not have it. But beyond that, also wanting to uplift frankly, the lies of the administration. When the Dobbs decision came down a couple of summers ago, and women in the United States risked or were at risk of losing their ability to get an abortion, and have lost that ability in many states and are now crossing state lines to do that, or doing so in their home states, but with fear of persecution, the Biden administration kept blaming Congress. We will fix this if Congress gives us a bill. An executive order was not in their purview. They were not willing to sidestep Congress. They were not willing to expedite. They were not willing to place pressure. Compare that now to where we are on the question of Palestine. And the Biden administration is not waiting for Congress. They are finding the loopholes to send billions of dollars in aid to Israel. And they are expediting it. They are doing it quickly. It's not like 2 years ago we lost our rights and now we're going on a tour to talk about it. It's 3 months ago, Israel increased its violence in Gaza. And on an ongoing basis, the United States is supporting them in that. And they're not waiting for Congress, but they're also applying political pressure to Congress. And the same is true, by the way, for Yemen, right? One of the major critiques of what's happening in Yemen right now is that the Houthis have not harmed a single person. Yes, they've blocked ships, but that's capital. The United States has gone in and killed Yemenis, has engaged in arguably acts of war without congressional approval. And so it's almost as though they make it so easy for us to be intersectional, because how dare you come to my city, right? In a city that's led by so many activist groups, and talk about reproductive freedom, as if though you're not undermining the reproductive freedom of Palestinians. Talk about the importance of congressional action when you're not waiting for congressional action when it comes to other matters. And so we've seen really just so many, and this goes back to something I said at the beginning, which is that there are protests every day. And the protests aren't just, I go to protests and sometimes I can't find the Palestinian, or I can't find the visible Muslim woman. I see Jewish comrades, and I see healthcare workers, and I see Black leaders, and I see Indigenous people, all coming together, because what is happening right now is bigger than any single group and requires that we all come together.
Thank you for sharing that, and speaking so eloquently on just the intersectionality of that. And I love that. Yeah, how dare you come to my city and not expect resistance, and other people, other groups that have faced oppressed identities being able to build that intersectional liberation movement. And I think that kind of ties into what I wanted to ask you, meital. I've seen you speak before, and you've shared and read your work as well, and you've shared very vulnerably about your own lived experience as an Israeli who grew up in a very Zionist household, a former IDF soldier, the process you have been and will continue to move through to undo the harm of that indoctrination. And I hope it's okay. There was a part in your book that I read that resonated that I just wanted to read, because I think there is a massive, I don't even know what to call it, internal war for a lot of people who share that identity, as an Israeli, as a Jewish person, maybe who thinks differently than you do, or who agrees with you, but the rest of their family doesn't. And this will tie into my question. You wrote a note for Israelis, Jewish, and/or people who are affiliated with the Israeli identity or the Zionist territory. If you find yourself on the other side of me, not agreeing with what you read or believing something else, please trust that I have also believed exactly that in the past. The only thing that is unique about my experience is that I came from one spectrum edge to the other, and the road is an ongoing winding spiral. I was raised very far from where I'm at, and I have walked here step by step, meaning I remember each step viscerally and can compassionately relate to where you're at. My only ask is that if something activates you, take care of yourself, and also please take the time and find the inner question behind the feeling and carry it with you for a season. See if you can find what's underneath, in between, above. Maybe nothing, maybe everything. That was very powerful for me to read. And I'm just curious of like, what sparked that change in your heart, in your mind? What would you say to other people who have that same lived experience, who might be feeling that tension?
Yeah, thank you. I want to start by saying that if we're not ready to become unbearably uncomfortable, we're not ready. You know, a lot of my comrades want to envision a free Palestine where they still get to make decisions. And I think it's important for us to remember that we are currently living in our wild imagination. This is whatever trauma you're carrying in your lineage as a Jew, whether it's through the Holocaust or other traumas that happened in the Middle East or anywhere else that have made your people go to the land of Palestine. Whatever that journey is, it's important to understand that what we've created in response to that trauma is our wild imagination, and we're in it right now. This is our biggest, wildest dream. And if you are conscious enough to understand that this dream is a nightmare, biggest nightmare maybe ever imagined by a group of people, and that nightmare not only martyrs and murders and destroys entire worlds on a daily basis, way before October 7th. On a daily basis, we have been destroying entire worlds. So if you are able to consciously understand that a little bit, I hope you also understand that every day you're destroying yourself, piece by piece. And the way that we are raising our children is destroying them, piece by piece. So the need to get extremely uncomfortable and understand that we don't get to envision what's next. And we don't get to make demands about how we get there. What we get to do right now is heal so that we can arrive there from a place of love and compassion, not as punishment, not as shame, not as guilt. We're seeing, look at Germany right now. That's what shame and guilt and punishment looks like after the fact. They are unable to look at their own wounds, and because of that, they have created an army that they can support, which is the Israeli army, so they can sleep better at night or whatever is happening there. So if you are Israeli, Jewish, if you're in a white body, like especially in this on Turtle Island, right? Like let's also remember, coming back to what Sandra was saying about Ferguson, like the IDF has been training the police departments of the US intensively since 9/11. Everything that is happening right now in Gaza is going to be implemented on BIPOC bodies on Turtle Island. Right now, tomorrow, next year. So it's really, I really want to invite people to that thing that I talked about in the beginning about caring deeper. It's you can show up until you're showing up for yourself. And that's something that I have learned in my process. I left the army because my body said no. There wasn't any conscious or there wasn't any conscious language that I was aware of at that time. I wanted to take my life at that time because I couldn't believe that is what is happening to me. I was raised from the womb to have this uniform on me, and the need to take it off because my body can't handle it made me want to take my life. So when I say go back to the womb, when I say go under the undercurrent, when I say carry that question for a season, when I say it might be nothing, it might be everything, I'm talking about your own liberation. And from that place, from that liberated heart, I've been called a self-hating Jew so many times recently. Like, I'm a self-loving Jew for the first time in my life because I've liberated my heart, and because I'm able to show for Palestinian solidarity, for the solidarity movement, for Black lives here, for Indigenous people here, for my own liberation, because it's interconnected. So I have lineages. I have lineages that have survived the Holocaust. I also have Sephardic lineages, and also have a grandfather who was an Arab Jew from Palestine, also Sephardic lineage. And if I will be asked to leave the land because the land needs to heal without me, I will do it with so much grace, compassion, love, and understanding. I wouldn't feel like I'm being punished. I will feel like this is an ask, and I'm going to honor that ask because I want the land to heal, and the people that live on that land and know how to take care of that land to be able to heal with the land. So to get to a place where you said that in your beginning too, like, what is a land acknowledgement, right? What does it mean to walk on guests? What does it mean to make the very, very uncomfortable decisions? And I'm not expecting everyone to just be like, here's my home. But how can you start opening the door? And what are you inviting in, and how are you inviting in? So when we're talking about the right of return, right, it's not a concept. It's not an idea. It means that people will need to give up their homes. So can we start imagining that reality so that we don't do it from the shame and the guilt and like repeat the cycle, but that we're actually doing it from a place of wanting to? Like, I'm excited about that. I'm excited to plant trees for the people who will come after me to my family home. So how do we get there as a communities, and how do we help each other to get there? Because it's not easy. It's breaking everything you knew as home, as belonging, as safety, everything they told you, all those lies. And breaking them is, I say it in the book, I feel like I've been eating my own shit, So how do we support each other in that digestion and really hold each other accountable to that? And, especially I feel like in this country, we will get to a ceasefire, right? But a ceasefire is step one out of so many steps. It's literally the bare minimum. So how do we keep that fire alive? How do you keep staying accountable to this prayer for a liberated Palestine, right? And how do you hold that, not because you're showing up for someone else, but because you're showing up for yourself? And there's nothing actually like selfish about it. It's actually that's like solidarity. That's like true belonging to this earth. Thank you.
Meital, thank you for sharing that offering and being so vulnerable. And I think the title, one of the things we talked about in the summer of 2020 and in 2021, Sacco was like, blacking out your social media, making a Black Lives Matter statement, taking a selfie at a march is not solidarity. Solidarity has to be actionable. What are you willing to risk? Are you willing to let go of power? Are you willing to have uncomfortable conversations in your workplace because that's the right thing to do? Not just saying Black Lives Matter, but we're not going to talk about police brutality because that's political. We can't separate the political and the personal. And I think that is what a lot of people are struggling with currently in that space. And I'm so grateful for that, for just that perspective. Like, for people who live in the United States, if Indigenous tribes and communities were to they do want their land back, would we be excited to do that? Would it be a choice? Would that be something we're working towards, that we look forward to, not just something that we're doing reluctantly? I want to get to some questions in the chat. And I got one question from someone anonymously, and I just want to preface that this person is whoever they are. I can't see, and I wouldn't tell you even if I could, is not isolated. I think in my position with SACA, I'm privy to a lot of people in closed conversations who thankfully feel safe enough with me in the position that I hold to share things that they can't talk about in their organization. And so as I'm reading this question, I just wanted to preface like this, I'm hearing this a lot from people. They're saying I personally am struggling with navigating solidarity with Palestine in my workplace, particularly as a non-Jewish manager of a Jewish employee who has shared their feelings of fear and unsafety when I have expressed solidarity in the past. How would you recommend navigating this, particularly as a white person who does not share the marginalized identity of my employee? And that can be for anyone, but meital, if you, I don't know if you.
Yeah, that that has been going around. That Jewish people say that they feel unsafe if a kafia, if a Palestinian flag, if and shutting down entire like spaces because of that. So I would say, especially as a white person in that space, we have the responsibility to build relationships and to find a way to have a one-on-one with that person and explain to them what's about to go down. Like, we're going to write this statement, we're going to have this panel, we're going to send this money, whatever the action is that you're about to do, sit with them, take care of them. Not as like a, like, take care of their fear, hear them out, whatever it is. Like, you have capacity to do that. And then, give them some resources of where they can find support, and then do what you need to do. Like, we cannot continue to how do I say this? I think there's been a way in which specifically Jewish Zionist Americans, they have this fantasy of what Israel is. And that fantasy has nothing to do with reality. Like, their dependency on Israel is actually killing us. So for them to like let go of that fantasy, they have so much work to do. But I want you to put yourself in a situation where if you were about to, I don't know, invite Black panelists into your workspace, and a white person would be like, I feel unsafe. What would you do? Right? Would that make you not take the action? I'm not like, there's levels of care, right? So like, if it's not you, find another person in the company or in the organization or in the community that can sit down with this person, explain to them what about to go down, explain what are the expectations, right? We are expecting of you to show up, to not show up. Here's a number for a therapist who's really helped me with my whiteness. Here's a number, here's the book. Here's my friend. We have so many resources. So don't ignore, because it's our responsibility to care, but also don't let that deter what you need to do. And people like, yesterday, this is the last thing I'll say. Yesterday, at that council meeting, there were a lot of Zionist Jewish folks who kept saying that they have the facts. And, the facts that they told are Zionist propaganda. That has nothing to do with reality. But they kept saying, these are the facts. And there come a moment, it's the same with my family. There come a moment where someone is going to look at you and tell you, your facts are not only wrong, they're propaganda. They are maintaining something that is killing your soul, not to mention everyone else on the land. And I advise you to look at this, read this, open that, look over there, And in that moment, if that person decides not to do that, it's on them. Right? So like we cannot keep catering to people who tell us that they feel unsafe. We all feel unsafe. Like being a white person, a Jewish person, and saying that you feel unsafe, great. Yeah, it's an ancestral wound. Go deal with it, heal it. The entire world has those ancestral wounds from different things. The Holocaust was not like a one event. Genocide is not affected only Jewish people in the world. So again, I think as white-bodied people, as Jews, as Israelis, it's our responsibility to hold that space and care for them, and also make it very clear that we're also moving on, and here are some resources for you.
Meital, thank you for speaking truth into that space. And I just want to, affirm also, SACA is committed, first of all, our values and our alignment and solidarity with Palestine, for free Palestine, for a ceasefire, for end to the genocide. That is unwavering. This is a first part in an ongoing series where we will continue to uplift. Our next one is all Palestinian artists. We're just going to continue to do this like every 2 or 3 weeks. Like the other things that we had planned, maybe we'll get to them. Maybe they will intersect, but that is unwavering. And I hope that as we continue to share resources, as Zahra and Sandra and Meital and the work that they do, those are also resources. I think connecting with Meital, maybe for this person too, would be an amazing thing. The book Bloodlines is incredible. That has been helpful for me as someone who doesn't share a Jewish, Israeli, Palestinian, or Muslim identity, as a Latinx person, as a queer person, as a trans person, and thinking about the intersections of liberation work and what that is requiring of me to get outside of my comfort zone and to undo a narrative I had growing up in the Bible Belt in a Christian home of Israel, or what that expectation is, and doing my own homework, which at times has been overwhelming, and acknowledging that in this space. But thank you for speaking that truth to power Meital. And for Zahra and Sandra, I just leading from that, like when we talk about actionable solidarity, what does that mean to each of you? Like if we're saying that solidarity has to be actionable, like what are your calls to actions for people here in this space?
It's always so funny being on Zoom. I'm trying to read the nonverbal cues to see who unmutes first. Calls to action for solidarity in this space. It can't just be words, it has to be action, right? I think it was Meital that said it, that if you're not ready to be very uncomfortable, you're not ready. And that's where we are. That's what this moment requires. But it also can't be for just us. So I'm conscious that in asking, for example, healthcare workers to show up for Palestine, I too now must be thoughtful about showing up for healthcare workers. In inviting Black communities to show up for Palestine, I too must now be committed to showing up for Black communities. And it's not reciprocal, it's relational, right? Is that Sandra referenced this earlier, is that the relationships had already been built. And that was why people were showing up for each other. But for me, it comes down to action and the way we live our lives. I can't simply care about an issue by forwarding a WhatsApp message or liking a Facebook post or, posting an Instagram reel. I need to be willing to be uncomfortable. Underlining that justice cannot be for just us. And so in order for all of us to get free, we have to keep showing up for others.
That was beautiful. Thank you, Zahra. I'm thinking, that we're all stretching ourselves. I think that was one of the other analogies that Meital brought to this space. I know I'm stretching myself. I'm a writer, I'm a strategist, I'm comfortable talking to people, but on the streets, yeah, it's not my favorite thing to do, but I've been on the streets a lot. I've had to take the megaphone. I've had to, I've gotten arrested. I'm leading direct action now. And so I think wherever you have, where have you been? And is there another step you can take? I think that's what we're all trying to figure out now. Because I think our movement has done a beautiful job of keeping the pressure on. But what we're learning is that fascism is not the monopoly of one party in this country. And we are not being listened to. We are being silenced. We're being gaslit. We're being told, oh, it's not as bad as you think. And Palestinians aren't really dying. We really can't confirm what's happening. We don't have any way of pressuring the Israeli government. We have no way, apparently. This is just really, they can say these words without laughing is unreal. But, then they'll put out the story that says, oh, Biden called Netanyahu, a bad name. They're planting the story that there's some kind of tension. There's no tension. The plan is to eliminate the native population of Gaza. The plan is to eliminate 2.3 million Palestinians from their homeland. And that's happening now. I mean, the Egyptians are building a border, zone in Sinai. I mean, the evacuation, the expulsion, the exile, the ethnic cleansing, the genocide of these people is imminent. I'm telling you, we need to do more. We need to do so much more. And I know that's asking a lot. I'm even asking myself, what more can I do at this point? We really have to be pushing ourselves. And so don't be afraid. You're doing the right thing. You want to be able to look yourself in the eye next week, next month, 20 years from now, 30 years from now. You want to be able to say, when this was happening, I stood firm. Because that's the only thing we have in this life. We can't take anything else with us. We have to just be able to live with ourselves and be able to, look our God in the eye and say that I did everything I possibly could.
Thank you all for sharing that. There's just so much wisdom that each of you have shared. I'm sitting with that. And, one of the other things that someone had asked was, can you see Zionism being dismantled in this generation? When we talk about, I too believe Palestine will be free. And you're right, there will be a ceasefire, but that being the first step. And then what? Does social media go silent? Do we stop marching in the streets? This is a long game. This is rooted in relationships, like all of you have spoken about. This is not just okay, great. My hands are clean. I'm done. I did what I can. Even if we're an ocean away, thinking about that, do you see there being an end to Zionism in this generation? And what gives you hope? That can be for any of you, all of you. Meital.
Absolutely. Yes. 100% in our lifetime. The most interesting thing for me is that I was raised extremely Israeli, extremely Zionistic, not very Jewish, which is a very common thing. And I am returning to my Sephardic and Ashkenazi practices as a form of healing, because what I'm learning over the years is that Jewish values and Zionist values actually don't match. They can't coexist. They eliminate each other. So Zionism, let us remember, it's an ideology that has no roots really, except for the need to not feel trauma and instead to militarize yourself. So it's actually an ideology that stands against anything we are trying to build in this new world we're imagining, right? So Zionism is a thought, it's an idea, it's an ideology. It has no lineage that is substantial enough to carry it. So what we need to do is just continuously go back to the lineages, go back to the earth, go back to the practices, that the ancestral practices that don't let you, like, you can't hold Zionism with them. And if you were raised like me, you know, Zionism was given to me as home, belonging, safety, all of those things that my child nervous system needed. And it was given to me through Zionism. So you need to learn to receive all of those things in other ways that are actually nourishing. Because what Zionism gives you is lies. You can't be connected to your heart through Zionism. You can't be connected to this land you say you want to protect with your life. You don't actually feel the land when you wear the IDF, the Zionist army uniform. You don't feel it. What we're seeing right now in Gaza, that's not training of a soldier of 3 years, of 2 years. This is generational training. This is taking your grandmother and telling you that your grandma is at risk, and the only way you can save her is by eliminating this enemy we've created for you. And to break that, we really need to, you know, I had this insight last week in a conversation that I had with Bayo Akumalafa when I was like, I want to take my people into the sea. We keep telling ourselves that our biggest fear is that everyone wants to push us into the sea. Let's get in there. Let's swim there. You know, like Zionism doesn't live there. Our true connection, our true belonging, our true heart, our love lives there. So yes, I do think that Zionism is on its deathbed. And the Zionists that are protecting it are showing me that it's on their deathbed because they're scared, because they don't know another way. So every time that they, you know, speak about what they're scared, they're actually giving me a testimony of what's about to die. And then also it's our job to catch them, you know, and be like, here's another way. Here's a true hug. Here's true belonging. Here's true love. Here's true safety.
Sandra or Zahara, I don't know if either of you have anything that you want to add to what Meital shared.
Yeah, this is the beginning of the end, for sure. We are experiencing a very violent and ugly rebirth. No one said decolonization wouldn't be violent, right? We always knew that would be the case. So here we are, we're on this road, right? So how do we create meaning out of this current moment? That's the challenge of organizers, of all of us, like thinking about, you know, the future. And that, you know, like I absolutely believe in a Palestine that is inclusive, right? That is a cosmopolitan and ecumenical place that doesn't, you know, my dog agrees, that doesn't discriminate on the basis of someone's sect, religion, ethnicity. You know, that's what we were before. That's what we were before colonialism. It's what we were under the Ottoman Empire. It's what we were during the British colonial period. I'm a Christian, you know, I'm part of Palestine. Jews are part of Palestine. Meital is part of Palestine. Your ancestors were born there. You know, this is the future that we have to like work toward. This is the future of the whole world. Like, can we erase, you know, these hierarchies of, of humanity? And yeah, I think that's the future that we have to like work toward. This is the future of the whole world. Like, can we erase, you know, these hierarchies of humanity? And, you know, I think yeah, Zionism is on its way out. I feel very hopeful because you all are taking to the streets. You all are here to like learn how to do more. And we will be heard. We will be heard, and the world is teetering now. The US is teetering. It doesn't know how to manage all the conflicts that they have created in the world. So let's push it over. Let's do everything we can to push it over.
Thank you all so much for sharing. I've put some resources in the chat. I know there was another question about just finding the resources and websites, both on the Eventbrite, on our social media. We've tagged Sandra's organization, Meital with Bloodlines, Zahra. Both of their websites, all of their websites have incredible information, calls to action, steps that you can take, things that I've also put in the chat just a Google Doc that is just a bunch of different resources they've gotten from a bunch of different places. That's an ongoing list. We'll eventually get that up on SACA's website. But I wanted to kind of end with this quote by Che Guevara. The true revolutionary is guided by a great feeling of love. It is impossible to think of a genuine revolutionary lacking this quality. And what I notice in particularly in Seattle, especially, Seattle is a very white city, not to erase the people of the global majority who live there. We're there. We just have to try harder to find one another sometimes. But I feel like there's a lot of tension and in this way that like, if you are not over here, kind of expanding on what you were saying, Meital, like if you're not ready to be super uncomfortable, then you're not ready. And I think sometimes people will use that and throw people away who maybe aren't ready, rather than it being a place of love of like, I'm going to continue to be in relationship with you. And granted, this is like, sometimes you don't have the emotional capacity to do that, right? I want to acknowledge that there's nuance in that space too. But I feel like in a lot of quote unquote radical, I'm using that term, it's not actually radical, but in communities that are pushing past this status quo and this narrative, I think people have been silent sometimes where now they don't want to engage. And I'm thinking about all the people in my life who I've been so grateful to, folks who are abolitionists, who maybe I wasn't there in a previous space. I wasn't, because maybe my heart wasn't open, or I wasn't ready to lean into that uncomfortability of like, but what do you do about this person that causes harm? And what do you do about this person that causes harm? And I really had to get back to the root of like, what you said in your book of like, what is the root of that uncomfortable feeling? Why do I want retribution that actually doesn't belong to me? Why do I want this person to be punished? Is that coming from a place of grief? And then doing the work to untangle where that grief is. What do I do with it? How do I turn that into action and keep that rooted in love? And I hope in this space, the people that have written comments, questions, people that have talked to me in one-on-one conversations or through an email, people who are struggling in their organizations right now, whether you are Jewish or you are Palestinian, or neither of those identities in that space, know that I don't think any of us in this room are, we've just figured out how to be uncomfortable and we love it and we do it all the time. I think it's a natural human thing to be like, this sucks. It's not fun. But I think getting to that place where we recognize the importance and the interconnectedness for us when we are doing solidarity work is super vital. And us being able to stay rooted in love when we were trying to make our solidarity actionable. I hope that folks here, we'll have this recorded. I'll get this out to you as soon as possible. We're going to continue this series. Please know that I'm a resource at SACA. I'm not going to share. I haven't shared anything that any organization or individual has shared with me. That is always a tight safe. There are people that want to support you in this work. There are people when you're in the room. I hope that you can take what's happening in this space right now, that when you're in a room and you need to speak up, that you see Meital and you see Zahra and you see Sandra and you see me, and know that like you're not alone in those spaces. If you need to wear glasses, something that helps me is I take my glasses off, everyone looks fuzzy, and I feel braver. If that's something you have to resort to, do it. Or find those 3 people that you know, like, these are my people. I know that they got my back. Whatever strategy you need to do to continue to lean into that discomfort, continue to lean into that. I want to give the last space and words before we close out to the panelists. Is there anything that you want to leave in the space, an offering, a poem, a call to action, a fundraiser, like anything that you want to share in this space? I want to give you the space to do that.
Well, I've spent a lot of the last decade talking about Gaza as being a place that deserves a political solution. It's not a humanitarian crisis. That, Palestinians in Gaza are not just hapless victims. They are very capable of self-determination. They're very capable of building their own society, being part of a Palestinian society. They've been fragmented from us for so long now. With all that said, it's really urgent that we make sure that UNRWA, the UN agency that is charged with taking care of the Palestinian refugees, doesn't fall. With the US and other Western governments pulling funding from the agency, and a very political, decision. A decision that really is, punishment in some ways for the ICJ, the International Court of Justice's ruling. They're just so terrified of the world order. Yes, give to UNRWA, and also write to your members of Congress and telling them to absolutely reject these calls. Part of the big supplemental funding package that was passed yesterday by the Senate included not only halting, the funding to UNRWA, which was what the executive order did, but also included never funding them again. I mean, there are no alternatives. There are 13,000 UNRWA employees in Gaza that are charged with providing schooling and food for the population there. The US is talking about maybe handing this off to the World Food Program that has fewer than 100 employees. It's absurd. So that's your task. Please write and give to UNRWA, please.
+1 to everything Sandra said, but I would also add, give to the Adalah Justice Project, give to American Muslims for Palestine, give to Jewish Voice for Peace, give to CAIR, give to Empower Change. One of the things that I've thought a lot about, because so much of my fundraising is focused, on policy work in the United States, is that I try, when I give, to match every dollar that I am giving abroad with the dollar that I am giving in the United States, because we are the root of the problem, right? Our policymakers are the root of the problem, and the organizations that are doing this work in the United States are also under attack. There's a reason that Florida has tried to ban SJPs in total, and university campuses are shutting them down because they know that in order for Zionism to end in this generation, as we have hope for, right, we need that mass mobilization. There's a reason that advocacy groups like American Muslims for Palestine are being targeted by Republican legislators, because they see that they're bringing people who care about Palestine to Capitol Hill, so that it's not just AIPAC who is there, it is all of us. And so please give to and make the calls for UNRWA, but also make sure that you're supporting the groups that are led by the most impacted people, Palestinians, anti-Zionist Jews, and others who are doing that work right here, so that we don't just have to give to UNRWA, our government will give to UNRWA again as well.
Thank you. Yeah, I amplify all of that. I think moving funds is stewarding funds in that way is such a beautiful way to bring people together. And this is coming up, so I'll just share this. But I want to invite people to grieve, to whether it's communally or with your puppy or in a bathtub or whatever you need. We have to feel this for it to change us, and our minds don't want to let us, for good reasons. But yeah, I want to invite people to be with grief and let it transform. And we, especially in this country, are so desensitized from death and grief. And I really want to open those practices for us. I think it will show us new ways.
Everyone, thank you so much for being in community with us. Thank you for consenting. I guess I didn't really ask you for consent, but and participating in this space that is holding grief. And meital, thank you for that reminder that, as uncomfortable as someone who tries to avoid grief at all costs, it is a reminder that that is where we grow in that fire, and that is important when it's living in our body, and that we can't transform if we are carrying trauma with us forever if we're not grieving that. Everyone, thank you for sharing space. I will get this recorded and sent out. If you did not register via the Eventbrite or the Zoom link, I won't have your information to send the recording to, even though it'll live on SACA's YouTube channel. I'll be sharing it with each of the panelists so that they can have it if they would like to share it. But I'm going to put my email in the chat. If for whatever reason you don't receive it, please let me know. And then I'm just going to play that song we started listening to in the beginning as we close. Thank you again.